Okay, in this lesson we're going to look to see a few more variations and what else can happen. We're going to see if black accepts our bishop sacrifice like before, how they can get checkmated, and then if black plays slightly differently and finds some of the best moves, how it results in some counterplay for black and it gives black side a chance to make a stalemate or even win the game, but we'll see what complexity ensues. So of course, if you're under attack, you want to get the attacking pieces away from your king, or maybe even trade off all of the pieces so you don't lose. So black makes a logical move by playing rook to e8. They're also, by doing that, they're attacking this pawn here on e4. So let's say we go ahead and we move our queen back, and he takes that pawn. So now black's getting a little bit of counterplay. He's taking a pawn. He's threatening this move check. But when the board is really open like this, there are so many tactics that you have to be very, very careful how you calculate, because thinking that you're just going to go ahead and gain some material is very, very dangerous. You have to look at all of your opponent's possibilities, of which there are many. And this is another reason why, if you know your openings and you save a lot of time on the clock at the beginning by knowing your openings, you're going to have an advantage later in the game when you have to calculate a lot more. In this case, we have this move here, bishop to d3, with which both blockades this pawn, which again was the reason we've had this advantage, because it's made it so our king has been safe. Now we have this threat from black being able to push that pawn down with a check, and maybe even getting a pass pawn and getting that threat. So the rook has to move. This bishop is defending these squares. Let's say the rook goes all the way back to continue to defend their king. Now we go ahead and do what we had planned on doing before, which is to play g6. If they continue to do what we saw before and just play h6, once again the sacrifice will work for us because of the close proximity of our queen and other pieces to the king, and the fact that he's not too safe. Because once we take this pawn and sacrifice that bishop, we always have this potential of being able to play g7 and making a check. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring our queen right over here, and they can't play something like rook to f8 and attack our queen, because then, of course, we have checkmate. They don't have time to do that. So maybe instead they want to play something like rook to e7 and make our queen go away, because then, you know, the rook is defended by the knight. They want to make it move back, but then they lose to g7 checkmate because of where our bishop is. Our bishop is aimed at their king, and so they lose that way too. So they're going to get checkmated in either case once this is allowed to happen. So if they choose, though, instead of playing h6 right here and allowing the sacrifice to happen, if they have calculated carefully, they'll see how dangerous it is. And in this case, they'll see that taking on g6 right here is actually better for them. We don't have a quick forced win anymore. We can take back with our bishop or our pawn. In this case, we'll say our bishop. We're threatening their rook, and we'll see how this might play out. They can play knight to e7 and attack that bishop. They can play rook to f8 and attack this pawn. Let's say they play rook to f8 and attack this pawn, or excuse me, this knight. We have to calculate very carefully. Once the board is open like this, we have to calculate very carefully. In a blitz game, anybody can win, but we have an advantage because we have three minor pieces. We have three minor pieces, and we have still have a safer king than our opponent, but it gets very complicated very quickly. If we make the mistake of doing something like playing knight to g5, which looks logical because of a move like knight to f7 coming with a check, it looks like it's forcing us to win material by being able to trade off the knight to the rook. But now black has counterplay, and we are in danger. They've got several moves. They can play this pawn down, which is a check right there, and that's dangerous for us. All of a sudden now they've got lots of stuff. Our king is open, and we don't necessarily want to let that happen. So we probably don't want to play knight to g5. Instead, maybe we want to play something like bishop to f7. In this case, we just defend this knight by blocking it in, but then our opponent can still play this checking move. We move over our king, and now their queen gets down and infiltrates. And so we have a really complicated game. But we still have the advantage because hopefully we have an advantage on the clock. We also have a little bit more material than our opponent does. In this case, black would be losing their knight right here by doing that, and our queen would be defending the knight So we would gain more material. He can give us a check, give us a check. He can try to force his pawn down, but in this case we can just take it because our knight's defending it. So we've given black counterplay, and he has opportunities now, but it's not so easy. I mean, if he goes here and we take this knight, he can also simply take this bishop instead of just giving us checks. And now he's got 2 rooks and a queen. We have a tiny advantage in material because of our 2 minor pieces for the rook. Now we can take this rook though. Check. And so it's very, very complicated. When the pawns come off, the calculation becomes very, very difficult, and so we have to just be very careful. And either way, white has a better game though. We still have an advantage. While you can never guarantee that you're going to win, if your opponent finds some of the best moves, some of the best ways to play, like in this case, instead of letting us do the sacrifice, they actually get counterplay, and they have this threat of playing this pawn down. So in the next lesson, I'm going to look to see how can we avoid this huge complexity and opening up the board like this, and not even giving our opponent all of this counterplay. We saw that in multiple scenarios we are able to make a checkmate, but if black plays really well, they're able to fight back, still have a chance to win. But we'll see how can we avoid that altogether and find even more forcing situations.